personal model of what emotional feedback represents. It's a communication with the self in an attempt to prepare you for a situation that you believe that you're in, whether you're actually in that situation or not. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Okay.
How do you explain intuition?
Intuition is when you have experience with a particular scenario to the point that you start to develop concepts about it. So and that can be wrong as well, right? So for example, let's say that I come from an abusive background where I've undergone like all kinds of abusive things, and my father cheated on my mom and beat her. And so I start dating somebody and he gets angry and he raises his voice and I intuitively feel like he's going to hit me, but he doesn't. My intuition is to prepare because I recognize the raising of the voice and the anxiousness that's happening as leading up to violence, because that's what I'm used to. Now, it's also could be the case that I'm correct, that the person is going to hit me, and that I am seeing the pattern in this person that I recognized from the past. Now, there's also things that people would call, like, for example, instincts, right? So, I mean, we do have an instinctive reaction, like that fight, flight, freeze. I don't know how much of that is taught or comes with the package, you know what I mean? When you're born, I do think that there are some things that are human, innately human, that kind of come with that as part of our biology, and that then our experiences sort of go into molding that, would be my thinking. And again, I have to ask, does that make sense?
And
makes sense.
And I think underpinning that is that biological aspect is, if we were to lobotomize Tracy, other than the world being a much sadder place, you could remove her ability to access that memory, and so that intuition would not be there. We have a lot of examples of people who've had brain injuries, and those same things aren't there anymore. And also on top of that, there are chemical interactions that directly impact that. I've talked about on the show having depression.
You bring up a good point in that there are people who, for example, are experiencing trauma, right? Mm-hmm. Like they'll have a post-traumatic stress disorder, they'll have reactions to particular stressful triggers, and so you have ways to treat those people so that they don't have an intuitive reaction. They hear a bang and they don't first think it's a gun.
Get under the table, yeah.
Right, so there are ways that you can adjust your intuition and adjust your reactions. Like a person, for example, who might be fearful of an attack could go and take self-defense courses and what do they call that? Or like martial arts, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
And you could become more comfortable with the idea of getting into like a physical confrontation with somebody and not be so fearful. So you can alter those things by going in and just simply practicing particular techniques to change them.
And not just that, but there are pharmacological things. I was going to say I fight. It's something that I'm open about, and I'm happy to talk about it, but I am medicated for my depression, and that helps, right? And so you have something that truly does directly affect my emotional ability to operate in the world. So when you ask about what is not chemical, well, we're talking about biology and we're talking about chemicals, and we're still saying that these are important things that are true and real and have impacts in our lives. But none of those things that we just described, there's no extra element. So if you're trying to isolate an extra element, what we're saying is this is what we've got, but we don't have that extra that I think you're asking about. Is that what you were trying to get at? Is there's something more to it?
Yeah, that is what I was trying to ask, and you guys actually explained that in a scientific way. Awesome. So that's not much I can really say.
Oh, thank
That's
you.
Cool.
Yeah, that makes me feel good. Thank you, Juan.
Take that, people in the comments who said that we shouldn't. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about today before we moved on to the next caller?
There is not.
No?
Well, I'm really glad you called today, Juan. This is my first interaction with Juan, and I think it was very positive. So
Right.
Thank you for calling.
Definitely, when you're looking at things, what we described, what we were talking about, we weren't just taking it that there was something additional. You know, we were looking at and observing what we know and going up until that point. When you hit a place where you say, I don't know, the best thing you can do is say, I don't know, because you're giving yourself permission to explore and learn and find out. And if you say, oh, I'm going to fill in the gap with magic, miracles, spells, or whatever, you are greatly limiting your ability to get to a conclusion,
you know what?
you know?
I actually tried to continue off the point of last week, but it's very difficult when we're on in that train of mind or conversation. So it didn't work out too perfectly, and it's not really something that can be explained so easily. You know what I mean? So I guess you guys' explanation, how you explained the things, are pretty awesome. So.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, and we encourage you to take that. You know, that is, we've talked about epistemology. I talked to you about epistemology briefly last week. And it is your toolbox for deciphering the world around you. And I encourage you to do that in other parts of your life, because you will find that the world is not less amazing. We live in an incredible world. And the more we learn about it, the more we can ask other questions and grow.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people think I'm playing a semantic game when I say things like, can you explain this? Or what do you mean by this? But I think what happens is that a lot of times we get very comfortable with words that really don't have meaning, that we're just used to them, and we've been told they mean
No, I
things.
wouldn't really say they don't have meaning, and you know, I don't know if that was referring to me or not.
No, what I'm saying is that when you have, like, what I'm tying it into what Eric is talking about, right? So, for example, when someone says, this is done by magic, well, magic is sort of a catch-all term for it's done in a way we don't understand. I don't understand how this could cause this, and therefore it's magic. And so what Eric is describing is that when you plug in a word like that, it literally stops you from looking for an answer, because you're basically saying there is no answer, it's a magic thing. And there isn't an explanation, because magic, if we could explain it, wouldn't be magic. So what we're basically saying when we use a word like magic is that thing, I don't know what it is or how it works or how that would be possible, and so there's no explanation. And then it just moves into the, okay, can't explain that, what's the next thing? Instead of saying, well, how do we explain it, or can we explain it? And let's look for an answer, instead of just saying it's unanswerable and then just putting it aside and never looking at it again.
Exactly. If it helps to make it a little more impersonal, if you're worried about this as just something that you're identifying. We had a person that called in last week and said, oh, I have a definition of miracles. And what they were doing is they were trying to redefine the word miracles to mean things that they see in the everyday world. But the reason we don't do that is because you are propping up the idea that most people have with miracles, and that is that it is some kind of supernatural influence by an intercessory, deity. And so by doing that, you're continuing to make it a safe umbrella for people to not take their kids to the doctor. I mean, there are real world effects to us propping up different ideas, and the idea of miracles in that situation is a dangerous one, right?
I wouldn't say that. Because,
No.
No, because today with today's pharmaceutical industry, there's always side effects of everything that's taken. So you can go to the hospital with one. You can go to the pub with one ailment and leave with several others. So I wouldn't really. I would recommend prayer instead of or not really prayer, but following the commandments, because sin is the cause to a lot of ailments nowadays. But
No.
And let's save that one for next time. That
Right?
could be the next
Nice
call.
can of worms
sin
that you just
causes
opened.
Sickness. Yeah, let's. That could be a whole other hour.
Juan, I hope you enjoyed your call, and we'll definitely hop into that. But I very much disagree, and we can always talk later about it. Okay, buddy?
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Take care, brother.
You guys
Thank
have a good Sunday.
Thank you, you
too.
too.
Thanks a lot.
And I think my first question would be something like infant illnesses, born with an illness, born with a defect.
I keep bringing up the same article, but it keeps popping into my mind as
But there